Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for that lovely welcome thing. It's fantastic to be here in Swansea, and the sun's come out. Even better for those who have solar panels. I was talking to a couple earlier. So I'm going to take you through just a little bit of history of why I set up Good Energy and what the purpose of the organisation is. It is a public listed company, but we have a mission as an organisation, and so we are very mission led. And then sort of to practically what we do every day as an organisation and what we're trying to demonstrate in the energy market. And then how I see the overall energy market changing from where it was 15 years ago when we came into this market to what it is today. It's in a very different place. And I'll sort of give you some examples of what's happening there. And then take you to a world where we see a future where business and consumers become much closer to energy and actually take much more control, whether that's individually through businesses or through cities. Control on energy comes much closer to the individuals, and how that might work. And then considerations for Swansea itself, particularly in the devolution situation on energy. So that's kind of how I'm going to roll this. I'm very happy to take questions at the end. If people want to interrupt, I'm very happy to take interruptions as well. But that's kind of the distance. So just to start off, sort of my background is I started life as an atmospheric physicist, which is why I got interested in climate change. So if you're an atmospheric physicist, but you don't want to continue to be an atmospheric physicist, you need to find something else to do. And the obvious place to end up is actually the energy sector, because if you want to address carbon emissions, the energy sector is probably one of the biggest areas to do that. And essentially the company is really set up to address three parts. One is to actually enable customers, individuals and businesses to be part of the solution rather than just constantly being told they're the problem, which is what you tend to find in political debate, is that we're going to do things to customers rather than customers be part of the solution. The next part is we always wanted to be a commercial business model because actually there's a lot of money out there going into things that are very carbon intensive, and potentially in the future they're going to need to go into something that isn't carbon intensive, and being a commercial business model allows that to happen. And finally, as I'm sure you all know, if anybody who is involved in renewables, the legislative framework and what happens in legislation is incredibly important. And there may be some very high policy level decisions that are fantastic in the ideas, but it comes down to the nuts and bolts of how you implement those policy ideas, of what actually happens in the market. And we've kind of reshifted ourselves to sort of try and show one of the things we think is really important is to show that there is a blueprint for a world in a low carbon economy that doesn't have to look like a lot of the energy companies look today. And I think that is also a really important part, because when you, probably 15 years ago, if you talk to some of the big oil companies, or you talk to some of the big gas companies, they couldn't see how you might make that transition, and they couldn't see how you might be a commercial model in this new world. And I think that is very much our role. And I'm not going to personally take the credit for E.ON splitting its balance so that they look more like us now than they did before, but I do slightly take the piss out of the CEO to say that they're just copying us, which makes me feel good. So in terms of the overall sort of situation we're in today, actually things are really shifting. So if anybody sort of was anywhere near close to the UN negotiations in Paris, COP21, indicating there were 21 meetings before this one. I went to one many years ago, and it was possibly the worst meeting I ever went to. It was chaos. Nobody knew what was going on. And I was incredibly impressed, actually, that Paris came away with anything. And what they came away with was a huge target of 2 degrees, trying to move to 1.5 degrees, sort of, which is amazing. So I have to say I take my hat off to the French civil servants, because I think they did an amazing job. The other next part was record-breaking, 286 billion invested globally in renewables in 2015. This is not something that's on the side anymore. We are moving to a low-carbon world. Whether we are at pace in the UK or not, everywhere else is. So this is something that's just moving forward, and it was the biggest investment in the energy sector went into renewables last year. In terms of the UK itself, UK energy resources, renewable resources increased by 21% between 2013 and 2014. And actually in 2015, 25% of the UK's electricity came from renewables. Now, I tell the anecdotal story as 15 years ago, I went to a renewables conference, which was held in the West End of London in a small pub.
and you could get most of the renewables industry into a very small pub. Today, it's producing 25% of the renewable electricity in the UK. It's an amazing transformation. And one of the things that's really exciting about renewables is that it moves so fast. You can change things. So we nearly have 1 million homes in the UK that now generate power in their own homes from solar. That's happened, that transformation has really happened over the last 3-4 years. So that is just huge in terms of the speed that renewables can go at. So what do we at Good Energy do? So we are a supply company. We have a license to supply electricity and gas. And actually, I'm pleased to say our gas is now 6.5% coming from biogas, which is a new change that started on the 1st of April. And we now offset all the rest of our gas emissions through offsets. But the main part of what we do is on electricity supply. So we buy power from wind, solar, hydropower and biogen and supply that through the grid to people's homes. And we are responsible. We have a license, we have a regulator, we bill people on a daily basis, we take a lot of customer calls, and that's kind of really important part of what we do. On the side of that, we also happen to have one of the best records on customer service. So we've come in the top 2 of which for the last 5 years. And I don't know, that we didn't actually set out to do that, I have to admit. But I think we did it because actually all our staff are really interested in what we do and what we're trying to achieve. So they're very clear about the mission of what the company does. So that was a rather nice byproduct of what we do from day to day. And has stood us in very good stead. We also are a developer, so we have developed both solar sites and wind sites, and we own solar and wind assets in the UK. And we do that really to give us security so we can supply our customers long term. One of the things obviously ongoing is as we grow, we need to make sure there's enough power out there for us to supply our customers, and that's one of the ways we do that. So we have an internal team who has the knowledge of development. We also buy power from other sites as well, not just our own. So we work with about 1,000 generators across the UK. And this is one of the things that's quite unique about us in that when we first started off, I tried to buy some power from some of the big 6. One of the big 6, I won't mention which one, who had some wind farms, and I wanted to buy the renewable energy from those sites. And they turned around to me and said, that's fine, you just need to post 2 years of credit in advance so you can buy power. Now, anybody who's ever set up a small business, posting 2 years of what of your revenues in advance is really tricky when you don't have a balance sheet. So we ended up actually working with lots of small generators because they were being cut off by the big 6. The big 6 said, you're all too small, we can't be bothered with you, and we're not going to pay you. So we said, okay, that's an opportunity. So we took the opportunity. They didn't want credit for us, we didn't want credit from them. We were all happy. And that's why, as a basis, Good Energy actually has a lot of small independent generators, you can see, across the whole of the UK. And we set up our systems to kind of treat generators like customers, because actually there's a lot of them. And quite often you find that their main job is not generating power. They might be a small community, they might have a second job. Quite often they're agricultural, or they're in the fishing sector, or they're in other areas. So it's a really interesting sort of set of different generators in terms of the way we do it. And that's really formed the basis of what the company is today. And then the rest of the time we have to balance this. So this is I don't know which day it is, which month it is. I'm afraid I don't know which month it is, but this is biogen power, there's some hydropower, this is wind, as you can see, changing throughout the day, and the solar peak in the middle of the day. And during these times when we haven't got enough power, we have to buy, and then we've got too much, we have to sell. So that's what my trading guys do on a daily basis. They're also weather forecasters, so if you want to go and find out what the weather's going to be at the weekend, we go and talk to the trading team, because they know better than anybody else. We take 50 weather feeds in from Met Office and various other sources, put those through, and we forecast out all our generators in terms of what the power is. And then the traders go out into the market and balance the two. Finally, so my question is, why is Good Energy's model relevant today? And if you talked to me 15 years ago, I would have said we're kind of doing it because we want to do it. For me today, the model has become much more relevant because of the changes we're seeing in the marketplace. So I've now stolen some slides off a presentation that was recently done, a piece of work we were part of on flexibility and what's happening to the UK energy market. So the next slide shows sort of what happens on a daily demand. So this is kind of what the overall demand in the UK here is these lumps. And this is nuclear down the bottom here, which is a baseload product. And then this is wind power over wind and renewables, which is variable. It is variable by its nature. And what's shifted from historical is that we no longer need large sets of baseload power because nuclear is already doing that. What we actually need is flexibility to help fill in these gaps. And we need to, and this is where the opportunities are, to see at a micro scale whether customers can become much more part of this conversation rather than being excluded. And one of the big debates right now, I mean, this is this combined gas turbine discussion which is going on at government at the moment. There's just no space for them anymore because they don't fit in this equation. They're the wrong technology. And it's a really interesting time for the energy sector because they're having to make these big decisions on actually the technologies we always were reliant on, those big power stations we could flick big switches on, aren't necessarily the solution for the future. And this is a big change that the industry is trying to go through at the moment. This was presented at a conference where you had the CEO of Aon and E.ON, you had various other companies there, you had the head economist deck, and they're all sitting there not knowing the answer yet. Which when everybody doesn't know the answer, that's actually quite exciting. I know it feels, some people find it very scary. It's actually really exciting because what it means is that we can look at a new paradigm. We don't have to do it the way we did it before. And these are some of the areas that they're seeing sort of possibilities. So they're seeing these smaller, much smaller engines, which are going to be run for much less time, which means much less investment coming online. And some people don't really like these because they're sort of diesel gensets essentially, but the opportunity there is to make them biodiesel gensets, so run them on waste chip fat, which we're seeing come through, and sort of exciting things. The next thing is storage. Now, storage is the big new thing. I have to say, I don't think anybody's quite cracked what it's going to be yet, but what everybody is saying is it is going to be there. Whether it's in the next 5 years or in the next 10 years, it's coming through. And what's exciting about storage, and I'll show you in a sec, is where it's going to come through in the equation. And then finally, you've got demand-side response. So somebody was telling me about 3% of the electricity used in the UK is on refrigeration in supermarkets. That's 3% of the whole of our electricity in supermarkets. I find that amazing. I hadn't realised that. So can you imagine, anybody in this room knows that you can switch your fridge off for a couple of hours without it really making any difference. So imagine what you can do with 3% of the electricity in the UK in terms of actually making that respond to the demand response in the UK. It's very exciting, and I think that's a really big opportunity. So what we're seeing in terms of the opportunity is that at a grid level, you could pair storage with big power stations. You could pair them with renewables. At transmission level, there's the transmission grid needs extra support, so you could bid into the support mechanism for transition and distribution. So right here near Swansea, the grid is very full. So if you want to connect a new power station into the grid here, you're going to be waiting for a very long time. We are currently waiting for a grid application just north of Swansea. And then domestic with solar, this for me is probably one of the more interesting. And then industrial and commercial with storage is, and I'll touch on that at the end, is possibly one of the most interesting that we're seeing. So actually what we're seeing is rather than the opportunities being as much up here, they're kind of much more down here in terms of what we're seeing going forwards. And that is a big transition. It's not just with the big power companies, it's across the board that we see the opportunities, which is why you begin to see this integrated approach and multiple player approach. So what I want to talk about now is something we've been working on, which is a peer-to-peer model, which begins to start to break this down. This idea of the Airbnb for energy, that somebody has something and somebody else wants it, and you have a platform where you agree what price to pay for it. And actually the energy supplier, us in the middle, becomes a facilitator, not a determinator. And that's a completely change in terms of the mindset of the energy market we've had traditionally. So what this does is it allows generators, whether they're local businesses, schools, communities, to set their own prices. So they can say, I want to sell my power. They put it on an auction place, essentially, at this price. And then you've got consumers who can say, well, I'll buy that. I want that bit of power, and I want power from my local generators. So there's a kind of whole set of renewable generators across either regionally or nationally that people can choose to buy from at particular prices. And they set up a matrix and it just runs, essentially. So what it means is that for generators, they can choose to sell locally and potentially discount to local businesses if they want to get that local sort of piece working. They can tell the story of the project so that actually people know about that project, and therefore if they want to build another project, they've got a really good track record so they can talk to planners about how it works. They can achieve premiums from customers that really want the power. So if there's a premium because they've got a particularly good product that somebody wants to buy from. So if you're looking now at the local food situation, so there is a premium in supermarkets where food is bought locally because they can sell it on as that. And this comes to this point here. And you can stay flexible, so you can modify prices whenever you want in this particular model. And what we do as an organisation is guarantee that if they don't sell their power, we'll buy it. So we're the backstop for this. And we're also the deliverer, so we make sure it gets delivered to the consumer. From the consumer's point of view, they know the energy supply chain, so where it's come from, who's providing it to them. They can do 100% renewable for carbon reporting. We've just done a report with PwC Assurance, which essentially looks at, historically, you couldn't count renewable electricity as carbon zero, as zero carbon. They've changed the regulations in terms of greenhouse gas reporting, and you can now do that. And we've just done some work with PwC to assure that. So any power that's bought can then directly go into carbon reporting for any organisation. You can measure and track. Now, what's really interesting is what we found when we've tested this is that this part is actually a sort of additional benefit to businesses that they hadn't realised before. So quite often businesses will take a bill and pay it. They'll know there's some different charges during the day, but they won't really think about it. What this system has allowed people to do is really see where those additional charges are and how much they are, and whether it's worth investing to either shift their behaviour or shift that demand into another period. Supporting local generators, and also what technologies you want to buy. So you can decide, I want 100% solar, which won't work very well if you're buying power at night. But you could make that decision. And you could also make a decision that you want to share the values of your generators, so you know where they're coming. So it becomes a whole supply chain check for the sim. And obviously there's guaranteed, if there's not enough power at any point, we provide the backup again. So what our role in this is much more of a service provider rather than a supplier, which for me is a kind of really interesting model going forward, because I think that's the way we're going to move long term, is it's not going to be all about us. It's actually going to be about the customers and the generators and who they want to work with. Next, for example, this is one of the sites on the site at the moment. So this is a National Trust hydropower station. It's got all the details of the site, so you can see the site, what impact the site has on the local, so you know where it's coming from, literally, as a consumer. You've got some detail on the site, how much power it generates, where it generates, and then obviously this one is the National Trust site, so who owns it. So that, again, is a sort of reporting part. If you want to report that, what we find is people, not only customers are interested, but employees are also interested. So they want to know that their company or their organisation is buying power from somebody they really truly believe. So this is an idea of a dashboard of how this might work. So this particular power source, they've chosen hydro is filling in the night part, solar is filling in the day part. There's a little bit of wind at the top, and then the rest of it is here. This hasn't actually got a total import thing, because at the moment it's still in testing phase, so there's not particular price setting, but this is giving you an idea of what somebody could look like if they wanted to do a reporting of where their power's coming from in any one day. The next one is a kind of month, so this looks at where their power came from over the month, but also you can begin to see the patterns of how peaky some of those power usages are, as thinking about that demand side, and which days are actually they're using a lot of power on, and which days are they using less power on. So the Wednesday here they're using a lot of power, and then this Wednesday they're not. So there must be something going on other than that in this particular company to understand why they're using so much power on that particular day. What this then allows us to think about, and what this has done for us, is to look at the profile of the usage. And this is a particular customer in the southwest who, this particular usage, which is what we call between half hour 35 and 37. For most people it's between 5 and 6 in the evening. The charges for this particular region are £20 per megawatt, so £20 per 20p per kilowatt hour. So most people in this room will probably pay 10, 12, 14, depending at home, pence per kilowatt hour for their electricity. In the southwest, for businesses, if you're buying electricity between 5 and 6, just for the distribution part, that's not for the power part, you're paying 20p. So it's a huge cost for businesses. And what was really interesting about this business knew this, but until they put it through this peer-to-peer model, they hadn't realised the big impact on their costs. So they really hadn't understood it. And just by starting to think where your power comes from, you then start to think how you're using it. And that was a really interesting transformation. And what this really highlighted to us is this is a massive opportunity for storage or demand-side response in here. So suddenly, actually, if you put a battery in here and you could take them off using any power during this period, maybe charge it up at a cheaper time either out here, then suddenly you can start to make a return on the battery investment. And that's what we found in this particular case, is actually there's quite a good return. They put a battery on this site that's scaled at the right size. They can now make a return on that, and they can save money.
Why is it costing 20p just the last time period?
It's because it's when everybody goes home and puts the kettle on, so there's a huge amount of stress in the system. And what they're trying to do is get people to do exactly this. So it's really a demand. It's being driven by the constraint on the wires.
When they change the working day.
Sorry?
When they change the working days.
Well, you could have that discussion, but haven't we been having a discussion about summertime and wintertime hours for years? My sense is it's probably easy to put a battery on to change the wires.
Across the country.
Yes, no, that's not.
Reduces rush hour traffic.
Yes, I might leave that one to you. I'll stick with this one. And then this is just a sort of opportunity. So, sorry, this is quite a complex slide. But basically, this is the opportunity here in terms of value that we reckon over the lifetime of a battery installed on the site, it will bring in 30 grand's worth of value, which is, if you're putting a 10 grand battery in, you can see that over a 10-year period, that's not a bad investment in terms of that coming through. So this is the kind of work that we're looking at, and this is where the internet, this whole idea of eBay for energy or Airbnb for energy, when actually people start trading with each other, you begin to think about some of these other impacts as well, and what else you can do for yourself and how you can reduce your costs.
Sorry to interrupt you, but going back to that scenario there with that increase in payment, what's stopping them putting in a diesel generator and generating?
They could put a diesel generator in as well.
But then does that contradict unless it's using green diesel? Doesn't that sort of go against the carbon numbers?
Yes, and I think the issue with a diesel genset, so obviously the thing about battery is, if I had a battery in this room and switched it on, you wouldn't know anything about it. But put a diesel genset in this room and you're probably going to see it. So in a business or a commercial setting, we're testing a kind of domestic scale battery in our offices. And nobody knows it's a battery, everybody puts a coffee on it. Because it sits in the corner, it's about this big, essentially. So it's quite a neat way of something that you can you can probably put it in your server room, you could probably put it in the garage underneath the building or somewhere. You can literally, it's a box that you can drop and go. Whereas a diesel genset, obviously, you need to maintain it, somebody needs to top it up all the time, and somebody needs to know how to switch it on and off. I mean, there are diesel gensets, I mean, they exist already as backup support, particularly for server places. And yes, you could do it with a diesel genset. But the opportunity with battery is, one, you don't need to increase the emissions. You obviously get some losses on this, so that's taken into account. But if you're charging it, particularly if you've got solar on site and you want to move, if you go back to the previous picture,
if you've got most of the solar generation will be during this period, you could actually reduce the amount of demand during the day and then shift using to a battery during this piece of that. And that's what we're finding as a potential. It's the real opportunity in domestic scale is when you've got integrated. Domestic doesn't really add up at the moment. If you've got solar, potentially it does.
How well advanced now are the control systems to make this simple for people to use? That's where the difficulty comes.
Yes, it is. And I think the answer is it's a work in progress. So we are not there yet on those. So the ones that we've seen, the ones we've installed are very simplistic. I've seen proposals to put some very sophisticated software systems in on top of the batteries to do all that load management. But for me, it's a massive opportunity. And this whole piece about who's going to own the home and who's going to own the control of the home, how are you going to integrate that? Because at home, I have an air source heat pump, a solar panel, and a battery. They are all different technologies. None of them will talk to each other. And if you try and put a thermostat on them, I tried to put a Nest thermostat, which is based on the Apple technology. Mitsubishi and Nest just do not talk. So one of the things I think there's a real opportunity is to come up with this kind of middleware approach for homes where actually there's an integration system where you can plug all these things in and something will just work out and say, this is the best way for you to operate your home.
Open protocol system.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's a real opportunity still. I'm not seeing anybody fill that space yet. So what I'm seeing is everybody coming from a particular technology point of view, but not an integrated point of view.
In other industries, obviously, open protocol had to be forced on the industry.
Yes.
You know, we're sat here under open protocol sensors. Yeah. You're talking about Mitsubishi PLC controllers and others. They won't do it unless it's forced on them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and this comes back to the legislation that legislation is therefore important in terms of this. So, yes. I kind of move to a much simpler picture, which I'm sure most of you sitting here probably recognise, which is Swansea Bay Tidal Lagoon. So just to give you a bit of background for our involvement in it, we have taken an investment ourselves in Swansea Bay as Good Energy. And that was really to secure some of the power from the site, because as an organisation we need power going forwards. And I'm sure you know about the proven technology, clean and secure, and the subsea side. What's really exciting for us is to actually consider this peer-to-peer model with Swansea and whether that can work locally in terms of supply and business. So the power that we buy off Swansea actually comes directly into businesses and consumers within Swansea. And that's something we're trying to figure out how that will work. We're doing a project in Scotland which is looking at doing something very similar to this, but with community domestic households where an anaerobic digester is being linked directly to a local community. We're being given lower distribution costs. So the wires, if I had to plug in, where's Swansea Bay? Over there. Let's say it's over there, and I had to plug it into this building here, I would be charged the same as if I was trying to transport it to Cardiff. And what we're trying to do is actually look at a way that I can use the wires from there to here without being charged the same amount, because it's a local distribution. And that would be a huge change. And we're trialling that in Scotland, where the local distribution grid is going to give us a discount because we're going to supply within a local area. And we see that as a real exciting opportunity, because you could then mean that decentralized energy is really cheaper for local people rather than transporting across countries, which will change the model in terms of how distribution networks work. And so that's something...
Just a question there. Would that penalise people that live in rural settings?
If they're generating their own power, then no, it wouldn't.
There's a lot of wind farms in rural settings.
Yes. And a lot of local people don't get the benefit of buying the power from those local sites. So I think there are opportunities there to make sure that in a rural setting, actually, you could get a better advantage.
How are we going to safeguard the overall security of the general grid, though, in those circumstances?
There's a lot of...
costs associated with
Yeah.
those.
One of the things we don't have at the moment, so if you, in your household, let's say you get on a train tomorrow, you probably know when the peak hours are. So you know when to get on a cheap train and when to get on an expensive train. If you go home tonight, though, you don't know when your power is expensive or when it's cheap, because your tariff is not telling you anything. But actually, your power, if you switch on power between 5 and 6, it's costing the country a huge amount of thing in terms of the local distribution. So we have no cost-reflective pricing coming from our distribution units through. So actually, if you saw the biggest, up to 30% of the load in the winter is there to deal with that winter sort of peak as we all come home after work. And so actually, if we change the way we looked at it and ask people to respond to some of those price signals, which they're not being asked to at the moment, then you wouldn't put as much pressure on the grid and you would be able to actually improve the security of it. So I think this method would actually help that, not undermine it.
Well, I mean, a lot of people find electricity bills exceptionally complicated as they are.
Yes.
There's like a tiered system throughout the day. Would that push people in there?
Well, it's really interesting because it depends. So it comes back to that automation piece. So there will be some people who are time poor, but relatively well off, who need a system to do it for them. And there are some people who have more time and don't have that much cash and actually would be prepared to respond. And there's surveys that do that. So a lot of the time people put the fuel poor in the bracket of the so people who can't do anything, and that's not true. So actually, if you start talking fuel poverty properly, you could see people would respond if they could cut their bills. If they were told, don't use power between 4 and 8 in the evening, so if you're going to do your washing, do it in the middle of the day, or do it in the middle of the night, then they would be quite happy to do that. There's a lot of studies that already show that. Trouble is that policymakers are quite draconian when it comes to fuel poverty, and have basically felt that everybody is vulnerable when they're in the fuel poverty. That's not true. There are vulnerable people completely, yes, but there are also a lot of people who are in fuel poverty who are not vulnerable, who are quite capable of taking action. And that's what we need to encourage, is that kind of change to actually allowing people to be part of this system going forwards, rather than just saying, no, you're all a bit useless, pat you on the head and we'll just supply you power, which is kind of where we've been to date.
Allowing them to get away with it.
Sorry?
Allowing them to get away with it.
Well, to be honest, it's not about getting away because they hadn't even thought that there was a problem in the first place. So it's not really fair to think about it that way. I think a lot of people would embrace it if we were allowed to. Yeah, exactly.
But there's still people in the press who are saying it that way, that we are bringing the system down because we're not supplying in the old-fashioned way, if you like, and not looking at the problem in new eyes.
Exactly, and I think this is very driven by fear, and Jane will know much more about the politics of it than I do, but all politicians fear is the fact the lights might go out on their watch. And unfortunately, that is a threat that's been used by the energy industry for many years to continuing policies that they want to continue to invest in existing technology, rather than shifting. Because, I mean, if you look at Hinkley Point, and you took Hinkley Point and you put it out to tender to the whole of the renewables industry, we could go in and deliver that base load power, if you wanted us to, at that price, with wind and solar and battery. You could probably do that today. But that doesn't suit the traditional technology approach to what we've said we're going to do. And so that we're in this really odd sort of technology time when everybody's a bit fearful about making that jump. But actually what we're seeing is consumer power is actually pushing it. This is where the push is coming from. And that's what's really exciting about it, because as soon as you get consumer power behind it, then everybody else falls in line. So politicians start to fall in line and energy companies start to fall in line because they can't resist that. They can't lobby against consumers.
You talk about the billions of pounds they will or will not invest in Horizon and Anglesey. And if you talk about the cost of a Tesla battery unit for every house in Wales, it's less to buy a Tesla battery pack for every domestic situation in Wales than to pay the billions and billions of pounds of setting up Horizon and keeping it and then dealing with it at the end of it.
Yes, I must admit, I haven't done the calculation. I'll trust you on that one.
It's a no-brainer, isn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean, I would say yes, wouldn't I? But yes, I mean, I think it is this concern about moving to a new place and it has always been a concern whenever you talk to the engineering side, and they they take their jobs very seriously in making sure that we always have power as consumers as quickly and when we want it. And so they are slightly terrified about the control being taken away from them. And I think this is the big thing, is that we have to have lots of projects to get people comfortable that actually we can deliver this in a new way, in a new paradigm. Where did I get to? Devolution in Wales. So I think the devolution agenda is really interesting, and I think it reinforces this whole idea of regions taking responsibility on energy. Now, obviously, some regions are more blessed than others. Wales is a pretty blessed region in terms of its energy resources. And so actually taking control makes a huge amount of sense, whether that's from the legislation and the licenses, but also from the mindset as well. So I think Cornwall is also pushing very hard on this. They're another region that has significant amounts of energy in that area. And so if we begin to see that cycle where people are generating energy and they're using energy locally, you begin to actually put less pressure and less price pressure on some of the big network systems, and less need for a long-term investment in more wires, which is essentially what traditionally we've gone about. So for me, decentralised reduces transmission losses, infrastructure costs, lower carbon emissions, and improves resilience of regions as well. Because what you begin to see is the cash flow stays with the energy flow. And so you get that local resilience built into a system, which I think that, for me, there's more work that could be looked at in terms of sort of research on this and what a resilient energy system looks like long term, and how that evolves on a decentralised basis. So what does the future hold? Baseload power on its own is no longer the future. It's not the answer to everything. So when the traditional way, whenever I've gone and talked on radio or talked to people, is, but renewables is a baseload. No, it's not baseload. It isn't baseload. It is variable, but it is low carbon, and it is local, and it is produced in the UK. We now import 60% of the fuel that's needed to generate electricity in the UK, and that's a number that's going up. The only thing that's bucking the trend is renewable energy in the UK. So that, for me, is that we don't have to think in this baseload paradigm. We need to move to a new paradigm, which is about flexibility and how you deliver that flexibility in the best and lowest cost possible, and from the widest number of resources. For me, decentralised devolved approach to energy is taking hold. There will be, I'm pretty sure it will be announced by the end of March, we will have over 1 million households in the UK who are generating their own power, which is a huge step. I don't think anybody would have thought about that. And I remember going to a dinner with, I think it was Vince Cable and the energy industry, and the head of British Gas at the time was very snotty about solar power and said, well, the sun never shines in the UK, solar's not going to work here. And so I'd love to just show he's no longer there. But obviously, 1 million homes in the UK is amazing. And for me, could business do the same? I think there's a real opportunity that businesses can now start to become much more part of this conversation, whether it's with other local generators in collaboration or on their own. Now, I have to check this stat, but last time I spoke to Welsh Water, as far as I understand, they generate 25% of their own electricity from renewable power, which is a kind of, as far as resilience for them long term, that's a huge thing. They are resilient now for any wild energy prices now. Admittedly, gas is currently tanking, so it's going the wrong way for them right now. But as a resilience policy, I think it's very powerful. And the UK is now 25% renewable. So we're seeing a significant shift. And for me, the future is bright and the future is renewably devolved. It is somewhere where actually it doesn't have to look like the old picture. It can look like it in a different way. And it can work hand in hand with a centralised model. It doesn't have to be attacking it. It can collaborate. You can still have centralised large power stations. Swansea Bay will be a large power station. But that doesn't mean it can't work in a devolved way with local enterprise and local business and local consumers. That's the end of my talk. Thank you very much for listening.